Adrian stood on the razor edge of two timelines. In one, he was the reckless fool, losing Mira with a single impulsive outburst. In the other, he was the cautious strategist, calculating every movement, every word. He chose caution, and that calculated decision became the final, irretrievable mistake that cost him everything a second time, worse than the first. You might assume the worst mistake he made was the one he traveled back in time to fix. You would be wrong. The mistake that truly destroyed his life was the solution he created to avoid the original failure. But to understand the devastating finality of that loss, we have to go back to the exact moment Adrian Cole ripped himself out of the future and into the past. October 14th, 3 a.m. Adrian's eyes snapped open, clarity hitting him like a physical blow. He smelled the scent of old coffee and concrete dust from the construction next door, the familiar reality of 3 years ago. His heart hammered a desperate rhythm against his ribs, a clock running backward. He scrambled for his phone. There it was, the draft message, full of volatile, unedited accusation, waiting for him to press an oppose. Send and oppose. That text in the original timeline had been the catalyst. It had been proof of the instability Mira feared, shattering her trust completely. Adrian felt the weight of 3 years of regret lift momentarily as his thumb hovered over the delete button. He had the knowledge of the future. He would not fail again. With a gasp, he erased the message. The screen went blank. The reckless ghost was gone. Now, he needed to replace that ghost with the perfect response, a measured, unemotional reply that showed Mira he was in control. He typed out the new text, careful, filtered, designed to manage the situation rather than experience it. He hit send. The instant the confirmation left his screen, Adrian felt a chilling certainty. He had successfully prevented the old mistake. But in trying so hard to be perfect, he had just ensured that Mira would seek comfort in the only place left, the genuine, stable emotional space he had just cleared for Eric Dalton. Adrian Cole woke up to the specific, precise weight of a life he had already lived and ruined. He was back in the familiar humidity of his Brooklyn apartment, the sound of the A-train rumbling beneath the street. The sheets smelled of the laundry detergent Mira insisted on. This was 6 months before the catastrophic night, before the single jealous text message that had irrevocably fractured their trust. Adrian lay still, monitoring the stillness of the timeline. Mira was across the bed, curled away from him, her breath shallow and even. He reached out, not to touch her, but to verify her presence, a verification of the temporal correction he had somehow executed. He had done it. He had returned to the point of origin. His life instantly adopted the strict structure of a surveillance mission. Every conversation was pre-analyzed. Every casual touch, every hurried lunch, was scrutinized against the ghost memory of the future he escaped. His mission was simple: survive the next 180 days without the fatal impulse. Mira noticed the change first, though she attributed it to stress. Adrian was silent where he used to be quick to argue. He was compliant where he used to be impulsive. He was trying too hard to be the man Mira needed, which was exactly the man he had never been. "You are moving like glass, Adrian," she commented one morning, watching him carefully set a coffee mug down, terrified of shattering the moment. "Just tired," he replied, the lie tight in his throat. He wasn't tired. He was overloaded with knowledge. He knew the sequence of the next 6 months like a battlefield map. He continued his routine, work at the architecture firm, late nights pretending to design, while actually scrolling through his old messages, marking the calendar. He met Talia Cruz, his confidant and friend, at their usual bar. Talia noticed the tremor in his hands. "You look like you're waiting for a train that already left," Talia observed, sipping her drink. Adrian just shook his head. "I'm just focused on avoiding critical errors. You always said your mistakes made you interesting." "My mistakes destroyed my life, Talia. Now, I'm building a buffer." His buffer was isolation. He began subtly withdrawing from scenarios that, in the original timeline, led to friction. He declined the work trip that caused the initial misunderstanding. He stopped attending the late-night industry gatherings. He was succeeding in making his timeline utterly sterile. The time narrowed down to the week of the critical incident. Adrian felt the physical manifestation of anxiety. It was a Thursday, 1700 hours. Original timeline. Mira was delayed at a foundation event. Adrian called. She didn't and Oppos. T answer. Driven by jealousy and too much whiskey, he sent the text that accused her of prioritizing her career over him. A text that led to 3 days of silence and the final breakup. Thursday arrived. Adrian canceled his meetings, locked himself in his office, and turned his phone off. He would not call. He would not text. He would avoid the impulse by removing the opportunity. At 1800 hours, the moment passed. He sat in the silence, sweat running down his temples. He had done it. The timeline was clean. Relief washed over him. A momentary, overwhelming tidal wave of victory. He turned his phone on, intending to send a simple, calm message, and quote, "Hope the event is going well. See you later," end quote. But the delay had already caused a temporal ripple. There were 2 missed calls from Mira and 1 text message. The text was short, and quote, "Are you okay? I Haven and Oppos. T heard from you all day. Eric called to check on me. He said you looked distracted this morning." And quote, Eric. Eric Dalton, the man who eventually dated Mira after the breakup, the stable, polished antagonist of Adrian and Oppos' emotional saga, was already introduced into this sequence. Adrian's absence, his complete withdrawal from the original moment of confrontation, had created a vacuum. Adrian stared at the mention of Eric. In the original future, Eric hadn't and Oppos' been an active player until months after the separation. Now, he was checking on Mira 6 months early, filling the emotional gap created by Adrian's unnatural silence. The sense of victorious relief shattered, replaced by sickening dread. He hadn't avoided the mistake. He had committed a different one. The impulsive rage had been replaced by calculated neglect, and neglect had allowed the antagonist a preemptive foothold. Adrian hurried home. When he walked into the apartment, Mira was on the couch, not crying, but composed, reading a book. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of concern and sharp confusion. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice steady, too steady. "I called and called. I got worried. I told Eric I was concerned you might have been in an accident. I just had to turn off my phone. I was focused." Adrian's response sounded hollow, evasive. He needed to apologize, to explain, but he couldn't in Oppos. T explained the time travel. "Focused on what, Adrian? On avoiding me?" Her tone held a measured disappointment far colder than the anger Adrian was used to navigating. "I needed 5 minutes of distraction, and you completely vanished. That felt worse than any of your usual meltdowns, honestly." He realized the severity of his error. His original impulsive text was hot, messy, and proof that he cared, however wrongly. His silence was cold, clinical, and suggested a lack of fundamental engagement. "I was trying to be careful," he whispered. Mira sighed, putting the book down. "Adrian, I don't want you to be careful. I want you to be present." Eric was present. "He didn't even know you were upset. He just came by my event to see if I needed a ride home, because he knew I'd be late." The mention of Eric's quiet, reliable presence twisted the knife. Eric was embodying the stability Adrian was desperately trying to project, but failing because he was paralyzed by fear. Adrian needed counsel desperately. He sought out Professor Linden, his old philosophy mentor, under the guise of discussing architectural theory. He walked into Linden's cluttered office, the air thick with old paper and dust. "Professor," Adrian started, his voice strained, "when you try to correct a past action, but the correction itself causes a new, equally damaging effect, what does that signify about destiny?" Linden adjusted his spectacles, studying Adrian with an almost unnerving calm. "Ah, the nature of causality, Adrian. You think you can step outside the river of time, but you find you are merely diverting the current. The water still flows downhill. The consequence is not avoidable, merely mutable." "But the new consequence is worse," Adrian pressed. "It was supposed to fix the relationship. Now it's accelerating its destruction." "Perhaps the original mistake was not the text, Adrian," Lyndon observed, tapping a book cover. Perhaps the original mistake was thinking you had the right to control the outcome. You tried to edit the relationship by removing a flaw, but in doing so, you removed the substance, replacing passion with fear. Fear, Adrian, is a corrosive editor. It leaves behind a version of the self that no one, especially not Mira, will recognize or trust. Adrian left Lyndon's office with a sinking certainty. He had successfully prevented the specific error, the single clear fracture point. But in his overzealous attempt to clean the timeline, he had created an underlying pervasive rot. His impulsive text had shown weakness and jealousy. His strategic silence showed something far more unsettling: detachment and calculation. That sterile absence had been the new, worse error. It wasn't an oppose, loud, but it was fundamental. Adrian went back to his apartment, watching Mira, realizing she was slowly distancing herself not because he had failed her in the old way, but because he was failing her in a new, profound way. The establishment of his life in the past was complete, but it was already tainted. The unease was growing, the uneasy certainty that the price of preventing the first tragedy was the creation of the second, far more complicated and inescapable one. He picked up the old brass key Mira had given him years ago, a symbolic gesture of trust. In the original future, he had kept it safe. Now, in his anxious grip, the key slipped, striking the hardwood floor. It didn't oppose, bounce. It hit a seam in the wood and cracked, the metal splitting neatly in two. Adrian stared at the fragments. The original trust was officially severed, not by explosion, but by accident, triggered by his own panicked instability. The consequence was taking root. Eric Dalton was already offering Mira the whole, steady key she deserved, while Adrian held only the broken pieces of his careful attempt. The game had not been saved. It had merely shifted to a higher, more painful difficulty setting. The attempt to recapture the easy confidence of the past felt like acting. Adrian stood across from Mira at the renovated bookstore cafe, the very spot where they first argued playfully and made plans years ago. He had rehearsed the conversations, the specific compliments, the light touch on her forearm. But caution was a heavy blanket, smothering spontaneity. Mira watched him, her expression shifting from anticipation to polite confusion. Adrian avoided the trigger topic, the impulsive comment about her work ethic that had ruined the original timeline, but in avoiding it, he left silence where genuine connection should have been. End quote. You seem preoccupied, Adrian, end quote. Mira said, stirring her lukewarm coffee. End quote. No, just focused, end quote, he replied too quickly. He forced a smile that felt brittle. He was trying to be the man who listened patiently, the man who was predictable and safe. He was trying to be Eric. The consequence was immediate and harsh. Mira needed reassurance, not a performance. She sought stability. And stability, Adrian noted with a sickening lurch, was now defined by Eric Dalton. Eric appeared later that week at the gallery opening Adrian had steered Mira toward. Adrian had planned this night meticulously. A shared moment of appreciation for art, mirroring their original engagement. But when Adrian hesitated, second-guessing the best angle to stand, the correct phrase to use, Eric stepped in smoothly. Eric did not analyze the situation. He simply existed within it. Eric stood close to Mira, discussing the kinetic sculpture. His voice was low, resonating with uncomplicated assurance. Adrian watched Mira's eyes, bright and relaxed in a way they hadn't been around him since the reset. She didn't oppose, have to decode Eric's intentions. Eric presented his intentions clearly, without the baggage of future knowledge Adrian carried. The new timeline was accelerating. Where before Eric had been a distant competitor, now he was a confidant. Adrian met Talia for lunch, the anxiety burning in his gut. He barely touched the food. End quote. You look haunted, Adrian, end quote. Talia stated, not kindly. End quote. You're moving with the desperation of someone who knows the results of the game before the whistle blows. It's unsettling. End quote. End quote. I am just trying to be better, end quote. Adrian insisted. End quote. I can't afford the mistakes I made before. End quote. End quote. This ISN and Oppos, T and Oppos, better and Oppos, this is camouflage and quote. Talia countered, leaning forward, end quote. The original mistake was a flash fire, a moment of recklessness. This new approach, this cold, calculated withdrawal, it's like freezing her out slowly. Which do you think hurts more, Adrian? A wound that bleeds or one that kills the limb by slow frostbite? End quote. Talia and Oppos. S words were the sharp truth Adrian refused to face. He realized he hadn't and Oppos. T just changed the external variables. He had fundamentally changed his internal wiring. The fear of repeating the past had become its own destructive impulse. He checked the old professor's office. Professor Linden was grading papers, surrounded by stacks of volumes concerning cyclical history and fate. End quote. I've noticed something about cause and effect, Professor, end quote. Adrian said, trying to make the inquiry sound philosophical. End quote. If you intervene in a system, even to improve it, does the system reject the change? End quote. Linden looked up, his glasses reflecting the desk lamp. End quote. The river always finds the sea, Mr. Cole. You can dam the flow, you can divert the path, but the destination is preordained, or perhaps the need for the destination is what remains constant. You simply create a new, perhaps more chaotic, path to reach the inevitable consequence. End quote. Adrian felt a cold dread settle. The consequence was the loss of Mira. He had only succeeded in making the journey to that loss faster and more complicated. This dread became tangible when he saw them together the following Friday. Adrian was supposed to meet Mira after her charity event. He arrived early, intending to show her the spontaneous commitment he lacked. He found Mira and Eric standing near the exit, enveloped in an intense, low conversation. Adrian watched Eric reach into his pocket. This was the moment of the revelation. This was the Punto de Virada. In the original timeline, Adrian had given Mira an antique silver key, a symbolic representation of trust. Months later, after a significant reconciliation, it was the moment she truly opened up to him. Now, Adrian watched Eric pull a small object from his pocket. It was the same design, an ornate, antique skeleton key. Eric held it out to Mira. End quote. Stability Shuden and Oppos. TB a struggle, Mira, end quote. Eric murmured, his voice carrying just enough for Adrian to hear. End quote. It should be the default setting. Take this. It's yours. End quote. Mira looked at the key, then at Eric. Her smile was genuine, utterly relaxed. She accepted the key. Adrian froze behind the pillar. The event was not the same. The key was not his. The symbol of trust, the moment that had marked their commitment, had been accelerated and hijacked by the man who represented everything Adrian was desperately trying to fake. This was not a second chance. This was a complete, structural replacement. Adrian burst from his hiding place, his control snapping. End quote. Mira, wait. End quote. They both turned, startled by the sudden violence of his movement. Adrian strode toward them, his vision blurring with jealousy and the temporal shock. End quote. Adrian, what is it? End quote. Mira asked, clutching the key in her hand. End quote. That key, end quote. Adrian gasped, pointing. End quote. Don't take it. It means something different when it comes from me. End quote. Eric stepped slightly in front of Mira, a subtle shield. His elegance now felt aggressive. End quote. You seem agitated, Cole. This has nothing to do with you. End quote. End quote. It has everything to do with me. End quote. Adrian shouted. End quote. That whole evening, that entire sequence. It was ours. You can't just rewrite it. End quote. Adrian's frantic intensity, his clear knowledge of unspoken history, registered as utter instability to Mira. Mira stepped around Eric, her expression one of painful clarity. End quote. You're right, Adrian. End quote. She said quietly. End quote. You rewrite everything. You come back into my life, obsessed with not repeating one mistake, but in doing so, you create a dozen new ones. You are a ghost trying to inhabit a body that moved on. End quote. She looked down at the key Eric had given her, felt heavy with new meaning. End quote. The original error, Adrian, was an accident fueled by temper. This, end quote. She held up the key, end quote. This whole thing you're doing now? This is self-sabotage, deliberate and painful. I needed honesty. You gave me strategy. End quote. Adrian watched the two paths diverge entirely. The clear path of the original future was now overshadowed by the dark, heavy consequence he had engineered. His attempt to preserve their love had not only failed, but had provided Eric with the perfect emotional contrast. The stable harbor versus the desperate, drowning man. He stood there, breathless, realizing the fundamental truth Professor Linden alluded to. He couldn't and oppose. He changed the destination of loss. He had only sped up the timeline and changed the mechanism of destruction. The guilt was no longer about the impulsive word he spoke. It was about the calculated silence that cost him everything twice over. He had tried to prevent a tragedy but had inadvertently constructed a deeper, irreversible despair. The loss was amplified. The consequence was secured. The clock hands spun faster. Adrian stood frozen in the rain-slicked alley behind Myra's apartment complex. The moment he had dreaded, the moment his carefully constructed facade collapsed, was happening right in front of him. Myra was laughing. A genuine, unrestrained sound he hadn't heard from her in weeks, while Eric held an umbrella over both of them. Eric wasn't just standing near her. He was close, too close. He moved with an easy confidence Adrian had meticulously suppressed in himself, fearful of triggering the original mistake. Adrian stepped out of the shadows, his presence instantly killing the sound of Myra and Appo's laughter. The air went cold, heavier than the rain. Myra turned, her expression shifting from light amusement to guarded exhaustion. Eric remained perfectly still, his stance protective. "Adrian," Myra said, her voice flat, devoid of the complex feelings that usually accompanied their interactions. This flatness was worse than anger. "I need to talk to you." "Alone?" Adrian insisted, his voice cracking on the last word. He looked at Eric, a silent plea and an ancient accusation in his eyes. Eric met his gaze, showing nothing but steady concern for Myra. "She's made her choice, Adrian. She deserves peace." "This isn't about peace, Eric. This is about history. This is about us." Adrian pushed past the boundary he'd set for himself, the need to scream overriding the fear of repetition. "I fixed it, Myra. I fixed the night. I didn't send the message. I avoided the fight. Why are you doing this?" Myra's eyes narrowed. "You think not sending that message fixed us? That was never the error, Adrian. That message was just the explosion. The error was the decade of waiting for the explosion to happen." He reeled back as if she had struck him. He had spent weeks navigating every minute interaction, every glance, every text exchange, ensuring he presented the calm, stable version of himself he believed she craved. He had killed his spontaneity, suffocated his passion, all to keep the peace. "I changed everything for you?" Adrian whispered, the realization hitting him. He had changed himself into a ghost. "You didn't change anything," Myra countered, taking a slow step toward him. "You stopped being Adrian. You became a calculation. Every word, every touch, every moment felt audited. You treated me like a broken vase you were terrified of chipping again. That's not love, Adrian. That's fear." Eric placed a gentle hand on Myra's arm, a simple, non-aggressive gesture that spoke volumes about their new dynamic. Eric offered the stability Adrian was trying too hard to mimic. In the original timeline, Adrian pleaded, desperation forcing out words he shouldn't have known. "I fought for you. It was messy, yes, but it was real. We had a chance, even after the fight." Myra flinched slightly at the strange choice of words, but her resolve held fast. "This version of you, the controlled, quiet, emotionally distant man, that's the real tragedy. You were so busy avoiding one moment of chaos that you created an entire future of numbness. Numbness is worse than chaos." Adrian felt the timeline slipping away from him. His effort to save them had not just failed. It had accelerated their demise. The initial, impulsive mistake had left scars, but the avoidance of that mistake had severed the artery of their connection completely. Eric doesn't calculate his feelings, Mira continued, looking at Eric, and then back at Adrian with pity. He just feels them. He's here, Adrian. You were always somewhere else, watching the clock, correcting the past. Adrian finally understood Professor Linden's cryptic warning. The time doesn't and oppose, T reverse. It merely folds in on itself. He hadn't and oppose. T undone the error. He had layered a new, more fatalistic choice on top of the original wound. He hadn't learned to trust himself. He had learned to fear the consequences of being himself. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small, tarnished silver key, a duplicate of the one Mira carried, a gift from years ago, symbolizing the opening of their future. He held it out to her, a last, futile anchor to the timeline he'd lost. Mira looked at the key, then shook her head slowly. She reached into her own pocket, pulling out the identical key she had always carried. "I don't need this anymore," she stated. In a swift, heart-stopping movement, she didn't and oppose. T threw it at him, but dropped it directly onto the wet pavement between them. The old brass key, brittle with age and the stress of his interference, hit the concrete with a sharp, final sound. It didn't and oppose. T just fall. It cracked exactly down the center, separating into two jagged, irreconcilable halves. The break was sharp and clean, mirroring the sudden, brutal finality of their separation in this new reality. The key that represented their combined trust lay broken, not by the chaos of Adrian's original error, but by the quiet, calculated fear of his correction. Eric stepped forward, placing himself between Mira and Adrian, his face now firm and unwavering. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was the resolution. Adrian stared at the two broken halves of the key. He didn't and oppose. T picked them up. He couldn't and oppose. T. They were the physical evidence of his failure. The first time he lost her through anger. This time he lost her through cowardice disguised as control. He turned his back on them, the sound of Myra's shallow breathing and Eric's soft reassurance burning into his memory. The rain intensified, washing over him, indistinguishable from the silent tears he refused to shed. He walked away from the alley, away from the future he had attempted to save, leaving behind a silence far more deafening than any scream could have been. He didn't and oppose. T just lose Mira. He lost the idea of Mira, the possibility that his mistakes could be overcome. He realized his punishment wasn't and oppose. T going back in time. It was being forced to witness the superior future he had engineered for his rival. The clocks in the city seemed to spin faster now, accelerating away from him. He had tried to pause time, but time simply accelerated his consequence. He was truly alone now, carrying the amplified burden of a future ruined twice. Se que esta historia é intensa, e por isso que eu compartilho esses momentos. Se você valoriza a verdade e gosta de histórias que te fazem pensar e sentir, faça o seguinte. Considera esse inscrever no canal e comente de qual cidade você está assistindo. O melhor jeito de garantir que você não perca a próxima lição de vida. Adrian stood in the intersection of two timelines, feeling the full weight of the consequence. Myra's words echoed louder than the impulsive text he had tried so hard to erase. And quote, "This version of you, the controlled, careful one, hurt more," end quote. He had feared the chaos he carried, but in trying to squash that chaos, he had extinguished the fire Mira had once loved. He looked down at his hand, remembering the original timeline where he had shattered their relationship with a single, furious message. Here, the impulse was gone, replaced by calculated silence and withdrawal. That silence had been interpreted not as love or caution, but as indifference. Mira had found Eric. Eric offered the stability Adrian had consciously discarded in his frantic attempt to rewrite history. Adrian found himself back in the apartment he had fought so hard to save. It was empty. The air smelled different now, sanitized of the messy arguments and passionate reconciliations that defined their first life together. He walked past the small, antique table where Mira kept the broken key, the symbolic key of their trust. In the original timeline, that key remained whole, only tarnished by neglect. In this new, calculated timeline, It had fallen and shattered the moment she realized his constant self-monitoring was a shield, not protection for her, but a barrier against himself. He tried calling Talia. She answered immediately, her voice flat. And quote, "She's gone, Adrian. Really gone this time." And quote, "She chose him," and quote, Adrian stated, the words tasting like ash. And quote, "She chose peace," and quote. Talia corrected him gently. And quote, "And you didn't in oppose. T looked like peace. You looked like a man running from a ghost only you could see. You were present in body, but you were constantly fighting a battle that hadn't and oppose. T happened yet. Mira needed someone who was present now." End quote. Talia paused. And quote, "The first time you lost her because you cared too much and acted too fast. This time you lost her because you cared too much and acted too slowly, too cautiously. You traded one mistake for a worse disease. Fear." End quote. The realization hit him with the force of a closing door. He hadn't an oppose. T just lost Mira. He had actively delivered her to someone better suited for this new path. He hadn't saved their love. He had perfected his failure. Professor Linden's words drifted back to him, whispered during a rushed consultation Adrian had barely listened to. End quote. "Time accepts correction, Adrian, but it does not accept erasure. When you try to erase a truth, the universe simply doubles down on the consequences." End quote. Adrian understood the cruel logic now. The mistake he originally made was specific, regrettable, but inherently forgivable in the long run, because it was authentic. The mistake he made here, the fatal decision to hide his true self and substitute caution for honesty, was a systemic failure that poisoned the entire foundation of their second chance. He finally opened the messages on his old phone, the ones he had carefully avoided sending. The original message, impulsive and cruel, had been about a small betrayal of confidence. The silence that replaced it in this timeline led to weeks of emotional distance, culminating in Mira seeking comfort elsewhere. It wasn't an oppose, a choice between a good outcome and a bad outcome. It was a choice between two forms of self-destruction. And by choosing the path of fear, Adrian ensured a consequence that was heavier, cleaner, and ultimately final. He saw Mira one last time a week later. She was laughing in a park with Eric, the sunlight catching her hair. She looked lighter, less burdened. Eric's hand rested comfortably on her shoulder. They were talking about mundane things, the kind of simple stability Adrian's dramatic, time-bending anxiety could never provide. There was no anger left in Adrian, only a profound, echoing emptiness. The guilt he carried from the first timeline was a sharp, localized pain he could fight against. The guilt he carried now was widespread, a chronic condition covering the destruction of a perfectly good woman who only wanted truth. He didn't oppose. He needed to return to his original time. He knew this new reality was permanent. The paradox was complete. The loop was closed. He had traveled back in time to save their love, and in doing so, he had guaranteed their separation, but with a crucial difference. He had ensured Myra's happiness, at the cost of his own amplified misery. That was the cruel irony of self-correction through fear. What this journey truly taught me is this: you cannot outsmart the natural course of life, especially when it involves the vulnerable chaos of human emotion. When you desperately try to avoid repeating a past error, your focus shifts entirely to avoidance, and you stop living truthfully in the present. The fear of repeating the initial mistake becomes a corrosive force stronger than the mistake itself. Adrian's tragedy was an oppose. That he couldn't oppose. Changed the past, but that in changing it, he sacrificed his own messy, genuine essence. He realized that the original, flawed Adrian deserved forgiveness more than the calculated, sterile version he had become in the name of salvation. The universe demands authenticity, even if that authenticity is painful. By trying to be the man Mira deserved, Adrian ceased being Adrian entirely, and that lack of self-truth was the deepest, most unforgivable betrayal. He didn't oppose. Avoid his mistake. He simply replaced a moment of impulsivity with an eternity of calculated regret. He had tried to fix the relationship. He had successfully cemented his permanent exclusion from it. Now, I want to know of you. Comment here underneath. What would have been your choice in Adrian's place? Would you have made this sacrifice, accepting your own enhanced misery for the sake of her stability? And if you like surprising endings and the realization that sometimes the avoidance of pain only leads to worse pain, I have left another video here to the side. It is a story of regret and unexpected consequences. Click there. We'll see each other in the next video.